All right, everybody, welcome to our next part of our discussion on databases in SQL. In order to go through the next few, the tool that we'll talk about today, we're going to be inside of our VM. So if you set up your VM, you used Ubuntu like I did, you should have pretty much an identical experience here. If you deviated from that, you should be able to get pretty close. The tool that we're going to talk about is called MySQL Workbench. It's an open source tool, which means it's free, provided to the community. It's supported by Oracle, which is one of the large database developers that I mentioned in the last video. The tool is available on Ubuntu. You can use your apt-get. And so if you type in sudo apt-get install MySQL-Workbench, then it should install for you there. You'll notice that I've already got mine installed, so it's going to tell me that the Workbench is already installed. If you go to and do a search for it, should find that it's available there, probably available for your package, for your platform. I mean, a package for your platform. So OS 10, I have it in OS 10, I have it on Windows, so that there's pretty good support and compatibility against a wide variety. So you shouldn't have too many trouble, you shouldn't have much trouble getting that installed and up and running. If you do, of course, let me know so I can help you out. Once you get it installed inside of Ubuntu, then typically the easiest way to launch is to do hit your little start button here, which brings up your overlay, and then you can do a search for MySQL, and that'll bring up your MySQL Workbench. Alright, the first time that you open it, you won't have any connections. And so in order to get connected to our database server, what you'll need to do is click this little plus icon. From here, name the connection whatever you want. Because I'm connecting it to localhost, then I oftentimes call that my localhost. And from here, the only other thing that you need to do is make sure that the host name and port is correct, which these are the default values. So since we're connecting locally, we don't have to change anything there. The username, so we're just then connecting as root, which again is secure from a security standpoint. It's generally a pretty bad idea, but for us and for our development purposes, that's fine because we need to be all relatively the same to make our discussions a little bit easier here, and make it a little bit easier for you guys to follow along in the demo. Type in the username. You can, for the password, you can say store in my keychain, and then type in whatever your password is, and then once you do that, go ahead and click test connection. And you should see that it says something to the effect of connect to MySQL with user root. So if that's good and you're good to go, you can click OK. I've already got this set up, so I'm not going to click OK. You can click OK, and then that'll save a connection for you. Right, so I've already done that. You can see now what you can do with this tool is you can add and manage multiple connections. So maybe you have a staging or a QA server somewhere in your network. Maybe you have a production box somewhere on your network, or that's available. You can have multiple connections here and manage those all then through, connect to and interact with those databases all through the MySQL Workbench tool. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll select the local host. And what this will do then is it'll open up a screen that looks like this. This gives us the ability now to interact with that database, right? If you look down here, you're going to have an option called schemas. And what schemas are, they are the databases. So a database server can have multiple databases. When we created a Drupal site, when we created a WordPress site, we created individual databases for those applications. What we'll want to do here is, for our example, and if you follow along here, this will help for the next lab as well. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new database. We're going to create it for the lab. We're also going to create it just to get some experience with it. Something that's important to note with a lot of GUI tools, with a lot of things that have a graphical interface, especially with this one, is that it's kind of abstracting away the commands that it's running. Everything that this does, ultimately, it's generating an SQL statement and then executing it against the database server. It's just taking the creation of the actual statement away from you and allowing you to click buttons and do things. I think a nice feature with this tool is that it will show you the statements that it's generating. And so we'll see that here in a little bit. I encourage you to take the time as you're working through it and as you're generating SQL, as you're executing commands, to look at those statements, and how that'll help you to build some familiarity with the statements that are being generated that are doing the things that we're doing to that database. So, for example, let's create a new database. Let's create a new schema. In order to do that, we have a series of icons here that are shortcuts. If you're not sure what each one is, you can hover over it and you'll get a little tooltip. In this case, we can go over this one here with the plus sign, create new schema. It'll open up this editor, this little wizard here, and this will be the name of our database then. So I'm going to call this CSC 292. We can take all the default values, and once we're ready, we'll click apply. Okay, here is the little pop-up. It allows you to review the script before you apply the script. And so what I was mentioning just moments ago was this is the SQL that this wizard, that this GUI is actually creating. Create schema, create database, and then the name that we provided it. And so it generated this for us. All right, so we can click apply and then close, and we can close this tab as well because we're done now. And you can see that we have CSC 292. We created a database. If you expand that, you'll notice that you have tables, views, stored procedures, and functions. We're only going to be working with the tables group. Nothing there. And so the next step for us to do is to start to create tables, and then eventually from tables we'll insert data. If you look at these other databases, you'll see that, for example, under Drupal, you have the tables, and you can expand that, and you can see there are a pretty large amount of tables, right? And this is the database, this is the tables, and this is how everything is stored within a Drupal website. There's users. Right, same with WordPress. There's our tables. Those are all the tables. That's how all of the data is stored inside that website. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll create a table. In order to do that, probably the easiest way here, we'll do it graphically, is to select that table group, right-click, and select the Create Table. Right, this brings up another tab, another GUI here, or another wizard. So what is the name of our table? We're going to create a user table, and we're going to define the columns. And so just like I did in that spreadsheet, we're now defining the type of data that we're going to store inside of this table. Because we're calling this user, this data is going to relate to users for our application. And so the first thing that we'll do is we'll define an ID column. You have to select, so once you determine the name, you have to select the data type. If you open this up, you'll see that there are quite a few different types here. For the most part, the ones that are most commonly used are right here at the top. Integer, varchar, decimal, date, time, blobs, though those aren't quite as popular. But probably these four are the ones that you'll work with the most common. Integer means integer, non-decimal, so whole number. Decimal then provides you with decimal. Right, varchar string, and we'll use those for first name, last name, username, password. We use varchar as a string, as we would with a string within an application. That means we want a variety of information. Numeric, you can only have numeric values. You can't have characters, alphabetic characters. With varchar, it can be a mix and match. And then date time allows us to store date time information as well, and we're not going to use that today. So we'll choose the data type int. This allows us then to determine or add additional behaviors or properties to those individual columns. And so as just like we talked about with in that last video, we'll define this as our primary key. And so we'll have this PK, primary key, that value is checked. You can see that when you do that, you get that little key icon. Again, very common to see that to indicate that this column represents the primary key on this table. Not null means it cannot be empty. Null means nothing, empty. Not null means it cannot be empty. And then we have an auto increment. So AI means auto increment, and that is what gives us that the database will manage and automatically increment the value of our ID column. So when we insert data into this table, we don't have to provide that value. Okay, we'll define another column. We'll call this one username. I'll leave it with the default. Varchar 45. We'll create another one called password. Same thing, I'll just leave it varchar 45. And then let's maybe do first name and last name. Okay. Now this 45 that we're seeing here, that's the length of that field. So that's the number of characters that we allow for this field. So each one of these fields can only have a maximum of 45 characters. You want to be aware of the value that you use. You don't want to be, you don't want to be too high. because it's a waste of space. You don't want to be too low, because if you're too low, then what the database will do is it'll either generate an error or it'll just truncate or chop off that data. So if I have a password and somebody wanted to use a password that was more than 45 characters, which would be awesome, if they did 46, we'd lose that last character. And that can be a problem then, because we're losing data within the system. Right? So you have to be careful here what values that you choose. If you want to change the value, let's say that we think our passwords need to be longer, we just change that value like so. While we're at it, passwords, this is not the way to do passwords, right? We're gonna just store passwords here in plain text, because I want to keep the demo relatively simple and straightforward. Normally though, the password you would leave as a varchar field, a string field, but the application would go through the process of hashing it or encrypting it. It would need to be protected, right? We have to have defenses in our applications. That is, when we store sensitive data, we can't store that data in plain text. It has to be encrypted or hashed. But we just probably won't have time to get too deep into that. So just know that this is not the preferred way of storing the password in plain text. It's bad practice and would lead to a lot of issues. Okay. So we have our data set up, our table set up, we have all of our columns defined. What are the names? What are the types? Any additional features that we want to select? And for this example, I'm only going to configure the primary key. Once we're done, we click apply. And you can see again, we get this statement so that we can look at how we would create this table with SQL. Because odds are, again, you do more development, you're going to probably end up creating a lot of the actual SQL yourself. Create table, database.table name, and then we have parentheses, and then it's our column and any of those additional features. So column ID, it was an integer, it's not null, and it's auto increment. Column username, it's just a varchar 45 and it allows nulls. Password, varchar 100, it allows nulls. It either is not null, that is you cannot leave it empty, or it is null, that means you can leave it empty. So it's just a binary decision on those columns. And then once we're done here, we also define the primary key is this column, which is our ID. And so this is what the actual SQL looks like in order to create that table. We click apply, we should see that it worked, and we can now close this tab, go back to our schema, and there's our user. All right, from there you can drill down into the table. You can look at the columns, you can look at some of these other features, foreign keys and indexes. Again, we're not going to get into those just because we won't have time. But this gives us all the information about that particular table in the columns. And this becomes important or helpful when you're looking at a table or a database that you're not familiar with. Let's say that we wanted to look at the users in WordPress, and I don't know what the columns are for the user table in WordPress. Here's our table, WP users. Here are the columns, and you can see ID, user login, user password, user nice name, user email, and blah, blah, blah. So now we can understand by looking at that table and those columns through this tool, the structure there. All right, in order to select data, you select the table, right click, and select rows. And this gives us a result set. So here's a result set for this table. Select star from user. Right? So you can see there's that SQL, just like we talked about in the last video. There's nothing in the table, and so you can see that there's no data available, so it's going to return an empty result set. When it comes to working with the data, then you have a couple of options to insert anyway. To insert, you can type in a username, user1, password, first name, last name, and then you can click apply. Right? And you can see that when you click apply, this generates the SQL for you. And I'm gonna break this just so we can see it. Right, so here's an insert statement. Insert into table name. These are the columns: username, password, first name, last name, and these are the values: username, password, Josh, and Stroshine, just like I typed them in. Right? So again, you can use this as a great place to start learning about SQL by interacting with it graphically and then seeing the statements that would ultimately get generated. From here we can click apply, close, and now you can see that now that record, every time I want to execute this statement, and this is an SQL editor window. Anytime that you want to execute the statements in this window, you just click this little lightning bolt. You're not sure? Hover over it. Just like the previous tool set, you get little tool tips, and so that executes the statement. Right, so that executed the statement. Now we have a result set with 1. right? You'll notice with that insert that I didn't insert a value for the ID, because that is auto-incremented by the database itself. And so every time I insert that, every time I insert a record, I don't provide a value. Whoops, wrong button. Right? I don't have an ID. I don't have that ID column in the insert into clause or in the values clause. I hit apply though, and now we have an ID of 2. It's auto-incremented. It's being maintained by the database, so we don't have to do anything. Okay, I could create that statement myself. So I could say insert into csc292.user. You can create essentially a shortcut here. When the database doesn't know what like right now, it doesn't know what database to use. We have 3 databases, 292, Drupal, and I have 3 databases anyway. And that's why you're seeing this before. So you're seeing the database dot, then the table name. If you tell it to use that, or if you double click, you see that turn to bold, that makes that the default database. And so then you don't have to do that. That's the reason why the database, or why you're seeing that inside of the SQL editor. Okay, so I could say insert into user, column names, username, password, first name, last name, values, user 3, password 23, another user. Okay, and then if we execute, and I'll even go ahead and just move this from there. Right, so what we'll do is we'll execute all these statements. It'll execute the insert, and then we'll select all of the records again. And there we go. We got another record. So that's 3. So with this window, we can generate valid SQL syntax ourselves, valid SQL statements, and execute them ourselves, and then it'll have the same effect here. The result set will populate. So again, it's a nice feature as you're getting used to working with SQL. Talked about select statements. So let's say that I just want to select let's say I want to select one column. Instead of saying star, I could say select ID, execute that statement, and now we'll get just the IDs. This can be comma separated. And so I can separate, using commas, all of the columns that I want to select. So ID, username, password. We need a whereby. Right? So let's say that, or a where clause. So let's say where ID equals 1. Right? We execute that statement. We get the record whose ID is equal to 1. Or I can say like, where username like user %. So if it starts with user, and then we wildcard that, which means it starts with user and then it has anything else, right? Which all of my users did. They all start with user and then have 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Order by. Let's say that we order by the ID column. 1, 2, 3. So by default it's ascending. Order by ID ascending. We'll have the same results. We can change that though. It's either ascending or descending. So now we get 3, 2, 1. Okay, and we can change that with any field. It can be either numeric or string. Order by username, descending. 3, 2, 1, user 3, 2, 1, right? Because this would be an alphabetical sort. And we can do the same thing with ascending. Right, user 1, 2, and 3. Okay, update with this tool. You can select a cell and enter in a new value and then hit apply, and you'll see that it updates, it creates an update statement. So update the user table, set first name equal to Joshua, where ID equals 2. Because I updated just one column on one record, we need to have that where clause. So I go ahead and click apply, close the table, and we'll see that that now updated it. I can execute that statement again. we can see that it's been updated. If I don't do a where clause, if I say update user set first name equal to Josh, then what this will do, I'm going to change the order here. Okay, then what this will do is it'll update. Nope. What happens when you get an error is you'll have this little error window here. Okay, and what happened in this particular case is because what I was trying to do is generally undesirable. You can see that there's some error code into the effect of safe mode. Because it saw that I was going to try to update everything in the database, it stopped me from doing that, which is good. So if I change that query to say where ID equals 1 and then execute it, then we'll get our results. Right? So if you don't get any results set here, that means that there was an error, and you'll need to check this window below to see what that particular error was. Okay, so that's how we work with update. The last thing then to do is delete. And so you can select a record, you can right click and delete row, click apply, delete from CSC 292.user where ID equals 3. Okay, that'll remove that result set. And of course, you can just create that statement as well. So I could say delete from user where ID equals 2. And that would delete that. Comments, hashtags are comments. So if you add a hashtag anywhere in the editor, then that becomes a comment. And there we go. Delete that record. All right, so that's the basics of working with this tool, and this will get you started really with Lab 8 as well, or Lab 8. So play around with this, create some databases, create some tables, select, run some queries, and interact with that table and see what the different queries can do. Develop a fundamental understanding of those basic operations, because you're going to really need to build off of those the more application development that you do. With that, I think that's all that I have for this video. The next one we'll move into talking about integrating PHP now, generating the SQL, and executing that statement against the database to get those results back and interact with our application. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, that's all I have, and I'll see you guys in the next video.